Hello, everyone. Welcome to AIPAD and the Photography Show 2025. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lydia Malamed Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of AIPAD and the Photography Show, and I'm really excited to be introducing the talk that we're about to listen to. This is part of our On Collecting series, a series that started many moons ago with AIPAD in the endeavor to continue AIPAD's mission to educate the public about collecting fine art photography. Today, our guests are noted collector Christine Symchych, I've just learned the precise pronunciation, and Lisa Sutcliffe. And I'll now do a brief intro, and then I'll hand it over to Lisa. Christine and her husband, Jim McNulty, are avid collectors of contemporary art, photography, both contemporary and vintage, video, painting, sculpture, and prints. Christine's love of the arts led her to a BA in art history from Carleton College, followed by stints working in galleries in the US and abroad, along with some museum work. She eventually switched gears to get master's degrees in urban planning and architecture, so I know you appreciate the room we're sitting in, but never lost the love of or interest in art. Christine is on the board of directors at the Milwaukee Art Museum, where she co-chairs the Acquisitions Committee, sits on the Finance Committee, and is a past president of their Contemporary Art Society. She also sits on the the Committee on Photography at MoMA. In her non-art world, Christine has been a nationally certified city planner for the last 30 years, working with municipalities across Wisconsin on long-range comprehensive planning, historic preservation, and revitalization efforts. She also has held a nonpartisan elected official role for the last 14 years in her community just outside of Milwaukee, most recently elected village president. She and Jim like to spend their free time traveling and sailing when not looking at more wonderful works of art. Lisa joined the Met in 2022, and her principal focus is post-1960s photography and time-based media. Previously, she served as the Herzfeld Curator of Photography and Media Arts at the Milwaukee Art Museum from 2013 to 2022, and Assistant Curator of Photography at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, 2007 to 2012. So Lisa and I have lived in the same place every part of our lives, from San Francisco to Milwaukee to New York. Her many exhibitions include the current Jesse Crimes Corrections 2024, Derek Adams, Our Time Together 2021, the San Quentin Project, Nigel Poor and the Men of San Quentin State Prison 2018, and Ricky Dijkstra, Rehearsals 2015. She received a BA from Wellesley College and an MA from Boston University. And with that, I will turn it over to our lovely conversants, and please enjoy it.
Well, Christine and I were just saying that we're so delighted that on such a beautiful day, so many of you have chosen to sit in this room with us. So thank you for your time, and I hope we'll be able to have a conversation about photography, the love of photography, and what makes you want to collect something. And you know, Christine and I met when I joined the Milwaukee Art Museum in 2013, and formed a friendship as well as a business relationship. And so it's really my honor to get to sit and talk to you today about why collecting matters to you, especially in this auspicious room on the eve of AIPAD.
Yeah, it's great to see you again, and it's really amazing to be here with AIPAD, so thank you.
So we brought some pictures because we figured you'd like to look at things, and I'm just going to ask Christine some questions. We'll talk for a little while, but I also want to make sure there's time for you to ask questions. I know you all have burning questions about why she collected certain things or what you might be wanting to buy yourselves when you leave this room. So Christine, I wonder, can you tell me to start out, what does it mean to you to be a collector? What does that mean?
So people used to call me that, and I used to be like, that's not what I do. And then it became obvious that that kind of was what I did. And, you know, I think you can have, once you get probably more than two, you probably have a collection. So, but I felt very hesitant about taking on that label. It has a little bit of sort of austerity around it sometimes. I think it has, in the way that I view the role, it has a lot of responsibility attached to it as well. So this is a photo that a local artist took of my husband and myself in our kitchen. Sometimes we turn into the art project as well.
Yeah, I love this idea that being a collector also means being part of a community and supporting that community and sort of allowing yourself to become a part of the ecosystem of collecting.
Yeah.
So I wonder, do you want to talk about the first photograph you collected?
So there's a couple early photos that we put in, and I think the common thread is I had no idea what I was doing or no idea what I was getting. And that's where I think in order for me to be effective at what I do, I have to use a lot of the resources that I have, which is, back when I started, not even so much the internet, but curators, museums, dealers. There's a lot of people out there that have so much information about what are you looking at, why are you looking at it, why does this object matter. And this was an early purchase. I had no idea what I was doing, really. And I'll go back a little ways. When I was in high school, I did photography. And I also grew up in a household where photography was a thing. My grandfather was a sociologist and took a lot of pictures. So in high school, I remember my mom, and she knows nothing about photography and doesn't look at it the same way that I do, I'll say. But she gave me a book of the Bescher's work, and she also gave me an Ansel Adams book of Manzanar, and how somebody who doesn't know a thing about photography actually finds those books, I have no idea, other than she went into Rizzoli and there they were. So, so those showed up, and I just kind of got really intrigued, and what I realized was I kind of liked the dry, sort of very severe, straightforward German stuff. So at one point I was looking through an auction catalog and I came across this picture, didn't know a thing about it, started to talk to some people about it, learned about this guy named Renger Potch, and I'm like, who was that? I knew nothing, but it wasn't expensive. It's not super valuable, but it's special to me because it's early. And then another picture of being the object of the art project, a local photographer was working on this postcard project. And so a lot of us participated, and I don't know how many they did, probably 500 or whatever, but where you could bring something that identified you. And this was actually one of the first moments that I said, well, I guess I'm a collector, so I'm going to bring a picture. And they said, oh my God, did you just pull out a Renger out of your purse? And I said, yes, I did. So that was kind of like a fun little moment. But there's a couple more pictures. One is, I think, Stephen Shore's Presidio, Texas. Just the dryness, the dustiness, the stillness. The Bescher water towers, I got a grid very early on. These are some of the first things that I purchased. And again, I knew nothing about nothing. So, but a lot of those themes and artists and sort of feel have resonated for the last 30 years or whatever. And it's kind of been keeping going. So
it's interesting to me that the first pictures you would purchase would be such sort of desolate, sort of empty pictures. I think most people go for something a little bit more like an Ansel Adams, but you really knew who you were from the beginning. You sort of chose pictures that spoke to you. And I find this really interesting because I think so much about how, you studied urban planning, you're very interested in architecture and the landscape. That's been a sort of core of your collection from the beginning. And so I see these as really reflecting you as a collector as much as it's your interest in the history of photography, or, that everyone's collection ends up reflecting them to some degree, which I really enjoy.
They can be very idiosyncratic. And I was known for a long time, probably still, as the person who collects architectural pictures. So, yes. So
and dry, dusty pictures of a road.
Yeah, and my husband actually really likes Presidio. There's some that he finds a little, maybe dull is the right word. I prefer the word cerebral. So, so anyway, we have that conversation periodically.
So you started to get comfortable making purchases and understanding what you were looking for. How do you start to then think about building a collection? What does that look like? As you start to buy more pictures, how do you start thinking about how you shape it, what you want it to look like?
That's always been a challenge for me, and mainly because I'm the person that wants an answer. I like to put things into a formula and come out with the answer, and collecting, especially as a person, doesn't have an answer. I mean, all of us would do something very different. So in the early days, we had a chief curator at the Milwaukee Art Museum, and he and I became very close friends, and I would just sob, and I'm like, Joe, how do you make a collection? What's a collection? How do I do a collection? And he said, Christine, you've got to have patience. And I'm like, but I don't have patience. So how do I have a collection? But his thought, and he clearly had so much more wisdom and experience and all these other things, but he really felt like if you sit with it long enough, you'll figure out how it pieces together for you. And you can look at schools of artists, you can look at, however you want to slice and dice a population, right? I mean, you can do it by gender or by ethnicity or by whatever. I think you have to start with the premise and understand the premise that you can't do it all. So, and I feel like before that, the first thing should be, do you like it? So I feel like we all would like something different. We all want to live with something different. I don't do a lot in the sense of pure portraiture because, we do a lot of pictures that have people, but not necessarily in a pure sense because I don't really want a stranger looking in my living room. I mean, it's a little weird, but so I'd rather have some, water towers in my living room, I guess. But so it's, I feel like you have to find your groove and sit with it and understand it and be okay with that because somebody over here is going to be doing something super different, and that's really okay.
And there's no one right way.
No, and quite honestly, if we're all doing the same thing, I mean, I feel like that can be an issue where you can go to a community and every single person has the same artist, the same things, the same thing. I don't understand the point of that because that's an academic exercise maybe, but it's not a personal exercise.
So when you start seeing a picture or pictures that you're interested in, what kind of questions do you ask when you're considering a purchase? What are the things you ask yourself?
Well, I do a lot of research, and I personally am obsessed with the object, and that has something to do with the image, but it has very much to do with the object, especially when you're looking at a vintage photograph. So I can have an amazing picture in front of me, but the object is damaged or scratched or not printed very well or whatever, and I will walk past that because it's not going to be what I end up living with, in spite of it maybe being super fun to see. And I personally want to know that when we're looking at vintage pictures, that they are as vintage as possible. So a contemporary print of an old image does not resonate for our collection. There's plenty of people that do that. It changes the price point significantly, and I get exactly why people want that. But I want the closest, most authentic object that I can have in the best possible condition. And then you get to the price. And then, you can research that and negotiate that and do whatever you want to do.
And is building relationships with dealers and getting to know artists a part of that for you? Is that important to you?
It is. I mean, and I think that photo dealers more than anybody are like the nicest, kindest people. They want to share what they know. They, especially some of the ones that have been around a long time, they know a lot. They know how to look at an object. I think that fairs are an amazing way to see things. You can look at, I've been to fairs where you have, 3 different booths that have the same image. They might be different eras of printing, they might be whatever, but you can compare, and when you start to compare and put it into your memory, then you have a dictionary that then you bring out the next time you see anything. And that's super important.
I think that's also just really good advice for anyone here who's interested in becoming a collector, is using a fair to your advantage. I mean, it's not just a chance to see great pictures, it's a chance to really talk to dealers, to ask questions, to look at prints from different places and get a sense of like, oh, I can get to know what a earlier print looks like versus a later print. And I know there have been years when there have been, 15 of the same picture across the fair, and you can really go and see the difference.
Yeah, and the papers are different, the chemicals are different. If you've got a 20 or 30 or 40-year gap in printing an image, they will not be the same object. And you will inherently like one better than the other.
We're just sort of looking at various pictures here, and I don't know if there's any stories you want to tell about any of them. Talk a little bit about, are there artists you own in depth? Are there periods you own in depth? How did that come about?
So,
Here we have two Dorothea Langs of a very different kind,
yeah.
a storage facility versus a mended stocking.
Yeah, and you know, so we own probably about 400 different artists and probably about 14 or 1,500 different pieces. So we collect some definitely in depth, and I think that when you collect, you can go broad or you can go deep, and or both. I mean, there's not to say you can't do both, and we do both. With vintage objects, you can't always go deep. But like for instance, with Lang, Lang's a good example. We have a number of different styles, different time periods. We want to try to represent a career, but you know, it's not an encyclopedic thing. It's not like what the Met has or what, you know, a museum has, because museums have been collecting for many of them for a long time. But some of those are opportunistic things where I'm like, oh, that's really beautiful. And some of them, it's, you know, very much about the hunt. You know, I know with this picture, the magnolia blossom, that's an image that comes up. It's a pretty common image in many ways, but ours is a really beautiful, gorgeous vintage print. And, you know, I'd seen the image for a while and I'm like, and then you know, you tuck it away and then you're like, well, that's not mine, that's not mine. And all of a sudden, then sometimes you find out that you see the one that is.
Yeah, and I think there's also a good point that you've sort of raised a few times, the difference between building a personal collection and building a museum collection. And I think a lot of people, you know, might feel like they're not sure what kinds of questions to ask. But the good news is you can always make mistakes. And then you don't have to go and de-accession that before a board. You can sort of find different ways to sort of change your collection as you're sort of building it.
And we've never sold anything. So we've donated. We donate a lot of pieces in a lot of places, but we do not de-accession with sale.
That's good for people to know. I think that's also important if you're collecting living artists. Is that something you're going to have to think about?
So quite honestly, that's actually something that dealers want to know before they sell us something that's really special.
Yeah,
because they want to know that we're not just flipping a piece to make some money.
Yeah. And so here's an artist you collect in depth to some degree?
Yes, we do. Edward Weston. So, and these are both beautiful images, beautiful prints, and you know, the Onion is a good example of where I saw it. I held one in my hot little hands, and I was maybe inappropriately drooling a little bit over it, and I had to let it go because the price was wrong, and it was sad, but I told somebody, and all of a sudden another one appeared that was actually a little bit older and still gorgeous, beautiful print, and you know, the price was significantly different. And I think that when you start to mess around in the world of vintage photography, you have to know what you're getting, why you're getting it, and what it actually is worth. And there are real prices for probably pretty much anything. And then there's always people that will pay whatever they need to pay, but I think that there are real prices for objects. And if you're playing around with what might be considered real money, I think there should be some responsibility in to figure out what that is.
Knowing what your price is and not just sort of being willing to get it at any cost.
It's very easy to, you know, say, oh my God, I really want it. So you do, I have discipline. And in an auction catalog, for instance, I write in my maximum price, and I've done the research. I know what I think it should be. And there's plenty of times it goes to the next bidder, and that's sad, but that's real.
And is this the one that got away that came back?
No. So, no, this isn't the one that got away that came back, but that was actually an Adam Foose. I sat on it far too long, and I thought about it far too long, and you know, someone else came along, and what do you know, they bought it. So, but then 4 or 5 years later, another one of the same series came along. It's one of the daguerreotype dresses, and he didn't make very many of those, and I didn't wait that long on that one. And then another one just got away in November, which I think maybe ended up in your collection. I sat on that one too long too. But someday it might show up on the walls at the Met.
Well, then you can visit it, because that means it's for everyone.
I'd like a personal invitation.
So another artist you collect in depth, and this is one of the things that I like so much about your collection, is that when you start to get interested in an artist, you really do research, and then you start to buy from across their career. You buy all kinds of pictures, and
We do.
It like a museum collection, it allows you to really get to know how an artist worked and what their curiosities were. And it means that museums can also ask you to borrow things, and that it's a great resource, for the public in that way.
Yeah, and we view our collection as a public resource, so we want to loan it, we want to have it out in the world. We can only, in our house, have about 10% up at any given time, we rotate it. I like to say annually, but not always. We do our best, which is not always that great. But so we try to be good stewards, and we want to help institutions. Institutions can't do everything that they want to do on their own. Mm-hmm. And relationships with institutions are important. So collectors help institutions, but institutions really help collectors. It's the best place to go and look at what's hung, what's on the walls, why did somebody put this stuff together? And what makes sense, what resonates, what do the labels say? What are they telling you about the work? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the ecosystem needs to have that cooperation.
Yeah, I think, art fairs are a great place to come and see a lot of pictures, but so are museums. And museums often do much more with education. And museums can't function without collectors, without philanthropists, and so it's really important for there to be a really nice kind of symbiosis between the two, that collectors lend to exhibitions, the support exhibitions. A lot of museums have friends groups, so you can get to know more about the collections. It can also help you learn more as you're trying to build your own collection, and I think that's something that has made the arts flourish in this country in a way that it is different than places like Europe.
For sure, and your title is Curator, so it's already a curated experience. Mm-hmm. So this is a membership experience, which means that you have all sorts of different things together. Some you'll like, some you don't like, but it's a great exposure to a huge variety. But when you go to a museum show, there's a focus, and there's a lot to learn there.
And I was very thankful to have you as my partner in Milwaukee, as someone who would sort of look at things with me and walk around fairs with me. And I think that can be a really beneficial relationship for collectors when they get involved with museums. So I encourage you all, if that's something you're interested in.
Well, and one of the things that we did together is, we would either support the acquisition, or you would use other acquisition funds to buy something for the museum. And if we liked it, and if it kind of fit into sort of our aesthetic, we would buy something as well, knowing that a museum has limited funds no matter what the museum is, and that they can't do everything by themselves. So, if our work will eventually land in an institution, then it's nice to know that there's sort of that relationship together. Mm-hmm.
So I think, there's the sort of the urban aspect to your collection. There's this is a built environment, but you also have really beautiful Robert Adams pictures. Again, always the sort of print quality is something that you're really looking for with vintage material. But you also collect contemporary art, and I think that's somewhat unusual for a collector. I think often people either collect really sort of focused on the vintage material or on contemporary, but Christine, you collect across, and you're not afraid to sort of jump into more emerging artists.
And we hang them together sometimes. I mean, my husband doesn't have a background in any of this, and he'll say, how about putting this with this? And my brain kind of explodes, and I'm like, oh my God, we can't do that, And then we get them together, and I'm like, he just saw something very different than I saw. And all of a sudden, I'm like, this actually kind of works.
So these are two works by the same artist, Stephanie Symchych, who is based in Berkeley, collage project, and then a sort of self-portrait from the Cargo Cult series, which I think was in New Photography at MoMA. And, interesting to be able to think about this in the context of this more historical material, or someone like Tyler Mitchell, who I know you've collected in depth as well.
Yeah, we have, I think, 9 of his pieces in our collection right now. So we're super happy about that. And that started because of my relationship with the committee at MoMA. So, you learn a lot about things that I don't care where you are and how often you're out and what you're seeing and looking at. Can't possibly see and do it all. So it's nice to have other people bringing new things and experiences to you. And so I created a relationship with him. And, one of the things that I think is, Tyler, first of all, is this unbelievably kind human, but he's so present and so aware. And one of the things I love about his work is he's unnaturally aware of the history of art, the history of photography, and the history of Black photography. And those are such different things. And I love contemporary artists that know that and that they understand where and how they're challenging some of these notions or boundaries or expectations, or where they're not, where they're going in line with something that we understand. I think that the best contemporary artists working in photography right now are, and Stephanie is certainly on the list, how do you present a history of humanity? Who gets to tell the stories? Who holds the stories? And how do we look at the stories? And where's our place in object and voyeur and all of those questions? I think there's a lot of really interesting, exciting contemporary work happening right now.
Yeah, it's sort of deconstructing the systems of knowledge production that we understand and trying to rebuild a way of seeing the world from different perspectives. And I love that, I think of Tyler Mitchell as someone who always is photographing people, and there's just these really beautiful portraits, and of course the pictures you do have some people, but you also have these sort of other pictures that are more abstract that are really quite lovely.
Yeah, and the one with the ring, that's actually printed on a mirror. It's a reflection, so you will always see you and or the surround in it, and okay, well, who's present and who's watching, and who are you saving? I think it's beautiful.
And on the left, Widleen Cadet, and on the right, Zora Murph.
Again, really about, 2 artists who are really asking, what is the story? How do you express the sort of, with Widleen, her family history, the emigration to the United States. We actually have this picture up right now, and we hosted Widleen not too long ago for dinner, which was a really special evening. And I've had some people say that they don't like that picture. It's a little creepy.
Oh, it's my favorite.
I know, I love it. And I like the fact that I wouldn't call it creepy, I would call it unsettling and maybe a little contemplative. And then of course Zora, he's another, real dynamo. And I think we own probably a dozen of his or something like that. But I like the fact that there's this, American flag peeking through this foliage, and, the history of the South and his history
and obscuring the view. And it's interesting to me that these are not straightforward pictures, but they are unsettling. They're a little bit abstract. They invite repetitive viewing and sort of looking, and that's what makes photography so interesting.
Well, and it was very interesting because my husband did not like this particular piece by Widleen as much, and but after talking to her about her work, and we're ready to rotate this down because it's been up for a while, and I've been hearing, when are we going to rotate? When are we going to rotate? Because it wasn't something that he sat with super well, but after hearing her talk about it, he's like, oh, can we just keep it up a little longer? Because
he finally started to see.
Yeah, and again, you bring in the resources and you layer in information. I tend to like pictures that are not always super simply understood. At the same time, I don't want something that I don't resonate with from a image standpoint. I don't want to have to know the entire story to like it, And my academic brain is trained to wanting to know the whole story, but I also want to, like, when my husband and I first started dating, he's like, I said, let's go to a museum, and he said, but I can't, I don't understand this stuff. And I said, well, you fundamentally understand, do you like it or not? And, let's just start with that. And it's like, do you like the fact that it is blue? Do you like the fact that it is this? Do you like the fact that it is a person? So you have to break it down into the language that can happen with that.
Mm-hmm. And I think we should also note that there may be a Woodley and Cadet exhibition perhaps on the horizon, so keep your eyes out for that.
There might be.
And the other thing to note that I think is really important that you said is that you rotate your collection. And I think as a photography collector, that's a true responsibility, and that's something you have to think about when you buy photographs, is that they are sensitive to light, and you really have to know that you're going to rotate them when you put them up.
And there are some beautiful pieces that I see that I just know fundamentally we can't be good stewards of. I view us as temporary stewards of anything we own, and sometimes I'm like, oh, damn, I just wish we could, but I can't. I mean, because it needs certain cooling conditions or whatever, and museums are sometimes not always better equipped for that. It's a fragile media, and that's the reality of where we are.
Mm-hmm. So you also collect outside of photography. One example here is the Tavares Drawn, which uses photography, uses imagery, but is perhaps not considered a photograph.
Yeah, and it has neon, it has sculpture. This one, I have to confess, we haven't installed it yet. It's a little bit of a complicated install, but I've got no problem like poking a hole in the wall or doing whatever we need to do, but it just hasn't made the list yet. So we'll get it up. And I think Tavares is, so I came across Tavares through you, and you said, I think we should look at this art, and I look at it, I'm like, I don't understand that. Like, I just don't know where to go with this. And, you walked me through it, and you helped educate me, and we looked at a lot of images, and then my husband and I acquired a beautiful one for the Milwaukee Museum. Then we acquired one for MoMA, and in the meantime, we had bought one, and after the MoMA one, we bought this one. So we have two of his pieces now, and, he's really, he's got so much going on in that brain of his. I mean, he's even like trained for space and all sorts of crazy things, but and his dictionary of invisibility, which is very interesting, which comes into play, again, of all of these people of color who have affected all of our lives, but most of us have no idea who their names are, what their names are.
Yeah.
So that's why we need curators. So they correct the collectors when they're not 100%.
So one thing that I really love about you as a collector too is that you commission artworks, and that's, I think, something that you have to have. You want to be able to take a risk, and this is an example of a Jim Campbell media piece that you installed in your pool room, and here he is on the evening when it was unveiled. But you can see it's a really sort of complicated piece, and I think I have a video that will start here. Let's see, yeah. So you can see that it actually has imagery that moves.
Yeah, so with this particular piece, Jim took, so first of all, we bought a piece, we traveled to San Francisco with our Contemporary Art Society in Milwaukee, which is a great way to experience all sorts of amazing things. And there's all sorts of associated groups like Aperture and all these other groups that have travel opportunities to go visit artist studios or collectors' homes or whatever. And it's great fun. And we bought a piece by Jim Campbell. First of all, I saw one in his studio that I loved, and it was sold out. That, though, started the relationship with the dealer. And sooner or later, we ended up with a Jim Campbell that was perfect for over our fireplace in the living room. Except for the fact that our house was under construction for 2 years. So it got shipped, it sat in the living room in its crate for 2 years. Then we put it up, and then it wasn't working. So then it had to go back to the hospital, and then it came back, and then we could reinstall it, and it's been good. But we have a room with a swimming pool. There's all sorts of climate issues and everything like that. And I wanted some art in there, but the question is, okay, what? You can't do paper, you can't do this, you can't do that. So finally, I was in New York and went to the Museum of Moving Image, and I saw this show of Jim's work, and he had recently started to work with images of swimmers and swimming. And I thought, well, this could work great. So we started an early conversation. We went through a bunch of iterations. We ended up commissioning a piece, and at the same time, he also got a little commission called the Salesforce Tower. So those two things, you know, sort of micro and macro, were happening at the same time. They both had all sorts of weird weather condition issues and all this stuff. So actually they were informing each other as they were both getting built. It put us on hold for like a long time. You know, I thought this thing would never show up, but it did. It came in a crate. He showed up at 9 o'clock in the morning. All our friends came over at 5 o'clock, and everything was great.
Yeah. But I think that's something that, you know, if there's an artist you really like and you want to develop a relationship with, like, think about, like, and maybe there isn't something you want to buy that's at a fair, but you want to sort of offer them funding to build something for you, to make something for you. It's a great way to build a relationship with an artist.
Yeah, we've done another commission. So this is actually going back to the video for a minute. He uses Super 8 images that he buys on eBay or wherever, I'm not sure where, and he loops them together, so it's very seamless, and they're all pictures of people playing at the beach or on, you know, jumping into the pool or whatever. And Jim's whole thing is he's trained as an electrical engineer, PhD, and he, in an age where we're getting more and more and more dense with information, how do you give your brain as little information as possible and still have it understand what's happening? And so these are super diffuse images, but you can absolutely pick up what's happening. And ironically, the further you get away, the more clear it is, because you want to come up and you want to engage with it and you want to embrace it, but you can't because your brain can't figure it out.
I think also my favorite part of this event is the little tiny orange cones around the pool to make sure that none of your guests fell in.
None of them fell in that night. We have on other occasions not been so fortunate. So.
Yeah, and so this is something you do often. You sort of work with artists to make portraits of you or to make work for you, and here's another example, a more recent example.
Yeah, this just happened about a month ago, so we turned into an ambrotype. So why not, right? And an artist there was a show in town, and they were looking for people to take the spots, and, you know, $500 later, we're an ambrotype. I mean, I think that's kind of fun. She's also made us into tin types. That she had a studio during COVID, but then had to shut that down a little bit, and she was trying to figure out what to do during COVID, as we all were. And so she went on the road, and we signed up.
Who's the artist?
Margaret Musa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Milwaukee-based?
Yep.
That's great. So working both with Milwaukee-based artists, supporting your local ecosystem, but then also working with artists you're meeting, you know, as you get to know them throughout the country. I think that's really important.
It's fun.
I don't know if we have any more, but I wonder, before we open it up to questions, if you have any advice for anyone in the audience who's thinking about going outside and looking for pictures.
I would say you have a room full of people in there that know a lot about a lot, and open up a conversation and just say, what can you tell me about this? I've done that with Art Basel Miami, which is kind of a spectacle. I've taken friends there and they're like, oh my God, this is crazy. And I said, find the craziest thing that you can find in here. And they pick out God only knows what, right? And I'm like, okay, let's go do it. So, okay, what can you tell me about this artist? What about their resume? What kind of collections are they in? Why are you choosing to exhibit this at this fair? What does this mean to you? Those are all fair game questions. And sometimes you find out that that weird thing over there is, you know, $6 million or something. But why not have the conversation? You could really learn something. And I don't know, there's no harm in wasting a few minutes.
So many great experts at AIPAD, so take advantage of that.
Yeah, and at our local institutions.
Yeah. All right, well, I want to make sure you all have a chance to ask Christine questions. I'm also happy to answer any questions you have. And I don't know if there's a microphone. Yeah, there's a microphone in the back, so Don't be shy.
Hi, I was just curious, where do you put all these photographs all over your house?
We have them in our home, and then we also have a large storage facility.
And that is something you want to take into consideration if you're buying large mounted and framed works.
For a while, they took up a guest room, and then somebody who may be married to me or not kind of revolted. So.
Lisa, as curator, what have you learned from Christine?
That's a great question. You know, I think that especially when I walk around art fairs, you know, because I'm at an institution, I'm a little bit more hesitant to ask a lot of questions because I don't want to tip my hat to things I might be interested in, or I don't know, make artists excited if I'm not really going to be acquiring something. And I think that, you know, Christine is a voracious learner, and so it was really fun to walk around art fairs with her and just see her ask as many questions as she could and go home and do all the research and call me. And it really taught me that there are collectors who are as interested in learning as curators are, and really curious and want to find out everything about it and know that what the market should be. And it helped me understand the way collectors work, which I think is part of this ecosystem as well.
That's a good question.
Yeah, and that was a beautiful answer, too. I have a tactical question. How do you keep track of everything and where it is? Is there software you use, or
That's a great
how do
question.
you do that?
I own the best software that exists in the planet, and it was designed by my husband. And it happened because I was at Perry Photo, and I called him from Paris, and I said, you have to go through my files because I need to know what size I got and what I paid. And he said, that's it, you're getting your own program. So we are unusual in the fact that it goes into the database, we put in images, size, artist size, dimensions, media, every single invoice, all sorts of images, often auction records. I mean,
I said voracious.
we have a database like you would not believe, and it's all on my phone. So I go in there and I just pulled up, I was looking at a piece in there, I pulled up the other ones that we have, looked at when I bought them, what I paid for them. So I'm trying to get him to go public with it, but I'm working on it. I'm trying.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? How do you integrate your digital database with the location of the actual photograph?
Some of the fields involve, the database grows with my needs. And so at some point I realized we had to have fields of locations. So it says, is it at our house? What room? It also, I keep records about what date I installed it, what date it came down. Now, I didn't used to. And if it's in storage, what room in storage it's in and what shelf it's on.
Yeah,
So-
and that's great for keeping track of how long it's been up, how much
Right.
light exposure it's had. I mean, one of the other things maybe you should mention is that maybe they need to get themselves a great husband.
Jim's not available, however, but no, and we also keep a large flat files in the house, so we have that alphabetical, but it says if it's in the flat files or if it's on the wall, or because I've had curators say, oh, do you have something that you can loan to this exhibit? And I'm like, yeah, but it might take me like a year to find it. So at that point I said, we got to add this field in, and then we had somebody help us locate every single object, put their eyeballs on it, say how it's wrapped, say if it's framed, I mean, all that stuff.
How many works are in the collection?
Close to 1,500 right now.
Mm-hmm.
How many artists?
About 400. 397 or 8, I think.
Thank you both for this talk. It's been really wonderful and open. It's just that we feel like we're kind of sitting in the living room being able to hear you two talk. So I think thank you for that. It's really special. My question for you, Christine, is about editions and how you feel about it, size, and if it matters, and if so, do you always gravitate towards the end, towards the beginning? And I guess, Lisa, it's also a question for the museum a little bit. Does it matter a little bit on the acquisition side? Like, do you worry about buying print number 1? Do you only want to get number 5? So on and so forth.
I'll let you answer first.
It doesn't matter to me if I want it. But edition sizes, there was a weird phase in there where contemporary artists were kind of printing small, medium, and large. And I feel that images have a right size. That's my feeling. I feel like the contemporary world has moved further away from that. I also really get annoyed if it's an edition and 1 through 3 is priced at this and 4, 5, 6 are priced at that. That really annoys me too. I think that also people are moving a little bit away from that. I feel like that just creates a massive bookkeeping headache for galleries and artists and all sorts of people. But editions, if it's an editioned work, I won't probably gravitate to a work that's an edition of 100 or something like that. But if it's an edition of 3 or 5 or whatever, I don't care if it's 2 or 5 or doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I would say the same, that if you're deciding to acquire a work, it doesn't really matter what number in the edition it is. There are artists like Friedlander who never editioned anything, so you're really just looking for the print you want. But in the contemporary world, it's not like there's a great difference between numbers in the edition because they're all made at the same time by the same printer, or, if there is a difference, then you want to look at that. And maybe you're looking at, someone owned this before and it was on the wall for a long time and it has light exposure. That's something more, we're sort of more looking for like conservation issues or, like material issues than we are with something like the edition.
But that's something that would be normal in the secondary market anyway, not in the primary market.
Yeah. The other thing I'll mention is that artists often have APs, and usually APs are only available to museums, and so if something sells out, it's good to know if artists have APs so that we can find out that it's available to a museum one day.
Well, and we just bought a piece that is technically one of 2 APs, and so the invoice came through, and I go through JAGs where I don't really sleep very well, so I'm up at 3 a.m. doing database stuff, and I'm like, I don't understand this. This doesn't make sense. So I talked to the gallery and I said, what does this really mean? Because the way that it was worded was just strange, and I try to be very precise about how I get things into the database. And it turns out, and it was a piece by Wendy Redstar. We also own a number of her pieces, I think 6 or 7 right now. But this is actually technically one of 2 APs. There will never be another AP, and there was never actually anything printed of the original edition. So it's technically a unique piece. So anyway, all of those notes are in my database because that's going to be very hard for somebody, if I'm dead, to figure out. So it was hard for me to figure out, and I'm not dead yet.
Hi, great talk, thank you. In the course of book production or exhibitioning, sometimes really magnificent printer's proofs will come up. And it's complicated because they're the best possible prints you could imagine, but they're unsigned. What are your thoughts on those?
That's not my wheelhouse necessarily. Because again, I go to them, I gravitate, I mean, I guess you're talking about probably contemporary versus something more vintage, but I gravitate towards the most closest to the artist intent object, which that would not probably fall into. So that probably
Well,
would.
but I'm describing printer's proofs that the artist and the printer decided to use for the book production,
Oh, yeah.
or for an exhibition in a museum or gallery.
Well, exhibition prints are interesting. I guess it kind of, I would say it depends.
I mean, I think there's a difference between a printer's proof and an exhibition print. I think an exhibition print technically gets destroyed at the end of an exhibition unless it's something that then becomes one of the edition. And if it does, then that is one of the edition, so then it's not really a proof. But I think in a museum, a printer's proof would probably wouldn't be the thing we would acquire unless there was a context in which the curator had a special relationship with the artist and knew how it was made and knew when it was made and knew what the history of that object was. I think we don't necessarily need for all the works to be signed, but we need to know the provenance and what the intention was when it was made. And a printer's proof, we would sort of note that history if it was something that came into the collection.
I mean, I think that, you know, as an object, they can actually, they have their own life.
They do, yeah.
And their own story. And again, I think it really comes down to being really aware of what you're looking at and what you're holding and why. And so long as you're aware of all of that, I think it's fair game for anybody.
You're involved with a number of museums. As you think about where your collection is going to end up when you and your husband do pass, what criteria are you going to be applying, or are you chatting about as you think through that?
That's a great question, because we chat about it all the time. You know, it's a little morbid, but it's a little real. And I think that collectors can get a little sort of off the track, and they can think that what they have is, you know, amazing, right? We all think that what we have is amazing. There are some things that, and I think that many collectors want their, I was just speaking to another collector actually in there who's talking about some of the same things with his partner, but I think we want to think that these things live as a whole, or we often gravitate to that. And at the same time, I'm not sure that that's super reasonable all the time. There's some things that maybe have a more natural home. Like, you know, maybe you own 20 of something and the institution that you're very close with has 200 of something. So, okay, it doesn't mean that what you have isn't worth it, but if you're giving it to them, why? I mean, maybe you want to give it to them and allow them to sell it so then they can acquire something else. That's totally reasonable and possible. And that's a great way to do something if you choose to, or you can find another institution where it would augment. I personally think very much about what augments and
What kind of impact it's going to make.
right.
Yeah.
And you know, there are some institutions, and you know, let's take the Met, let's take MoMA, let's take any of the big institutions. They have giant collections, but those collections still have holes. So there's plenty of place where, you know, there might be a conversation to have something go to one of those institutions, and then there's other institutions where they have a much smaller body of work, and you know, I know fundamentally that our collection would actually totally wildly transform it and put it on the map. So you can think about it in a million different ways.
And I think that's also a great conversation to start with curators and institutions. If you get involved with various institutions, they have friends groups, and you can start to get to know curators. You can find out why they're collecting, what they're collecting, and start to think about that as you build a collection so that you understand what they're looking for. And there's some kind of like back and forth about, well, perhaps if I'm collecting this, it would make sense for your institution in the future. And then if you start those conversations early, you know, it really helps to understand, you know, for the institutions to plan for that, or for you to be able to understand, you know, as you're planning for yourself in the future, what possibilities are. Mm-hmm. It's a great question.
It's a very good question, because you can't take it with you. So you either got to sell it, you got to donate it, you got to give it to somebody, or you got to put it in the dumpster. So
Don't put it in the dumpster.
Yes, put it in there. Just tell us first.
You spoke about the fragility of photography as a medium. Have you ever been in a situation where, especially with modern and contemporary color work, that there has been some deterioration or shifting of colors? Do you think of it as part of the life of the object, or do you ever contact artists to see whether or not it would be worth reprinting with you know, more modern color inks, papers?
that's a great question.
How do you approach that?
Yeah, I avoid it. So there are so many amazing 70s images out there, and I love every single one of them, and I know that I'm not the best custodian for them. So I love seeing them as shows. The Stephen Shore show was amazing. I've seen plenty of images, probably a lot less than you, that have shifted, and I think, oh, that's really too bad. We own a couple color images of that era, and they have not shifted. And I've also done things like dye transfers and stuff like that of that era. So those are hopefully a little bit more sturdy. I don't own any pictures that have shifted or have needed to be reprinted, but certainly with a contemporary artist, that's not a unusual request.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to be collecting a lot of that, knowing where cold storage is and having access to cold storage, which is usually not that common for personal collections. You know, when the Met collects something contemporary color, we buy 2 prints at the same time, and then they live in cold storage, and so that way if anything happens to one, we have a backup. But that's not, I think, common for a lot of personal collections because you don't have that kind of space.
I'm planning on donating anything like that before it's a problem. I'm going to let it be somebody else's problem.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. This was so much fun to have me here.
Lisa.
And thank you.
Thank you.
This was fun.